For most of history, our industry has operated over the horizon, quite literally, and therefore out of sight. Today, however, our industry is more visible than ever. However, visibility does not necessarily mean understanding. In fact, in many cases, it means misunderstanding. If I look at the vessel track for a collision here, and this is the collision between the tanker having just departed and the Norwegian warship that happened back last November. If I don't know anything about shipping, I quickly draw conclusions about this. But most of the conclusions are wrong. I misunderstand what I'm looking at. But information is now more available to outside watchers than it ever has been before. From drones on scene, this is the Solomon Trader, drones that give us a bird's eye view of what's happening, again, we think we understand it, to the posts of those on board. In this case, seafarers on board, hiding in the citadel on board their vessel while under attack by pirates, were messaging with another company vessel. People on that other company vessel decided it would be helpful to post this information on social media and bring attention to the plight of their fellow seafarers, without realizing that they were potentially sharing important security information with the pirates and anyone else who might want to watch. And it's also unintentional information that we share with the devices in our pockets. Anyone use a fitness tracker, perhaps Strava or something on your Apple Watch? A lot of them share your information without you realizing it, unless you opt out. This is the map, a heat map showing where people have exercised. This is a small section of the west coast of Africa. But if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you notice some people exercising at sea. Zoom in on those. We get the exact outlines of where offshore platforms are, outlined for anyone to see in great detail. Move a little further along the coast and we get the outlines of vessels swinging on their anchor. Not because anyone intentionally shared it, but just because the app was in their pocket. Now, the danger for our industry is perhaps limited because these aren't time-stamped. So I know there was a vessel there, but I don't necessarily know exactly when. For the US Air Force, a little more of a problem because, quite simply, Air Force bases don't move. And so we can see exactly where soldiers have been exercising, something that should be hugely secure, but isn't. And of course, there's the internet, the Google search. Google searches give people access to our industry in a way never before seen. The two lines here, the top line is the search interest for anything related to our industry, anything related to shipping, while the bottom line is the line simply for container vessels. Any spike here is interesting to understand, well, why did it spike? Why did we see a global move in interest in our industry? This is for the last year. We get high-profile things like the Ukrainian-Russian situation where Russia seized some ships. But we also see minor incidents from our point of view, perhaps, but collision between a vessel and a house. If we look at the container line here, we see just from the beginning of this year, the MSC Zoe losing containers off the coast of the Netherlands. We see the issues in the Red Sea with Saudi tankers being diverted. And then we see a line of interest in the first couple months of this year, and I'm going to suggest that has to do with the Venezuelan situation and the pressures that have happened there on the shipping industry. Your incident, whether you think it is major or minor, whether it's your clients or whether it's your company itself, you can move global interest and global attention in our industry because we're all in this together. People don't differentiate one shipping company to the next in many cases. If they see one shipping company do something that's a problem, they assume it applies to all shipping companies. A lot of the speakers today, throughout all of the sessions, have mentioned the word reputation. And I'm glad that it's becoming more and more recognized within our industry because it is important. Our reputations impact our ability to do business with high-profile charters. They impact our ability to trade into the ports that we want to trade into, to attract the best talent. But my focus is on crisis communication. And in those situations, reputations have an impact on our ability to save money, reduce political interference, and actually get on with dealing with the situation without outside meddling. But we're often dealing with journalists. My job is to deal with the media and deal with the communications for a situation. And one of the mistakes people sometimes think is that journalists are out to get them. That's rarely true. Instead, journalists are in a race with each other. Each of these outlets is competing with every other outlet. And for them, it's often more important to get the story first than to get it 100% right. And that can lead to things like this. A newspaper, a magazine, so concerned with getting the story first that they printed 100,000 copies before the results had actually come in. Oops. We see this happen all the time in our industry as well. So if you're involved in a situation, whether you're a shipping company or any company, you should ask yourselves, for any situation, could this attract negative media attention? And there are 4 variables you should look to. Number 1, are there pictures? Is the situation highly visible? Number 2, does it connect in some way to a larger story? Perhaps it's environmental concerns, perhaps it's labor issues, perhaps it's a political dispute. Are you part of a bigger story? Number 3, could people beyond those directly involved feel impacted? And focus on that word, feel impacted. You might say, there's no impact here. But if people feel impacted, if they're scared, it's a story. And finally, are there recognizable names involved? Most of us in this room don't work for companies that have recognizable brands outside of our industry. But the people who entrust us with their cargoes, they very often do. If you've got an oil major's cargo on board, if you've got a high-profile automotive cargo on board, and many others, you have a brand that is recognizable involved in your story. So if you've said yes to any one of these, be prepared for media interest. If you've said yes to more than one, I can almost guarantee you're going to have pressure. Communications is about reaching individuals. It's not actually about talking with journalists or engaging with social media. It's about reaching individuals. So if I look at a situation like this was a vessel that dragged anchor and she came aground in a highly populated area. This video is mobile phone footage that was posted on Twitter before anyone at the head office of the company was informed that anything was wrong with their vessel. It happened that quickly. But if I'm communicating for this situation, who do I care about reaching? Now, you're all going to think of lots of stakeholders, and you should, because in any communication situation, you need more than one strategy. But let's think for a second about the population, the people. This was in Lisbon. Does anyone know how to speak to the people of Lisbon? No. But we can imagine an individual. We'll call him Jose. Now, we can all think about what Jose cares about. We can imagine him living in a condo on the beach. Now I know what Jose needs to hear from me. Now I can talk to an individual, make it personal, because it certainly is to Jose. Social media is changing our industry completely, and we're seeing the rise of new platforms that are increasingly driven by visuals, that are increasingly driven not by thinking things through, but by reacting instantly to them. And people are also responding differently in the sense that people no longer see social media as a positive. 42% of Facebook users in the US reported taking a break from the platform last year. We don't take a break from something we think is positive. Perceptions are changing, and that's a good thing, but we don't know where it's leading. The average user scrolls through 90 meters of content every day on their phone. That's the equivalent of scrolling from the top of the Big Ben clock tower to the bottom, reading through it. But as these clips show, we scroll through quite quickly. We don't actually pay attention to everything we're looking at. We only pay attention to the things that scare us or alarm us. But incidents in our industry are scary, and they are alarming. And fake news is all around us because there's a big difference between believability and good judgment. Just because something looks believable doesn't mean it's true. But we can't expect people to understand that unless we take the time to explain it to them. Unless we're explaining the difference between believability and reality, we can't expect people to understand our industry. We're the experts. We have to talk to them. So there are 4 essentials that any company, whether you're a shipping company or whether you are a service company, that any company should have prepared to allow them to deal with the media pressures that will follow any incident that checked one of those 4 boxes. Number 1, have a detailed shore, and if you're a ship owner, vessel contingency plan. Know what your processes and your procedures are. Know what's going to happen and what you're going to do about it and who's going to do it. Make sure that includes backups. Don't assume it will always be the CEO. He'll handle it or she'll handle it. Have backups. Have resilience. Number 2, take that a step further. Have templates prepared and have responses to some of the most difficult questions you might get asked. Think about what might a journalist ask you that you wouldn't want to answer. Prepare an answer to that question. And these can be prepared in advance because the difference between one incident and another is often relatively small in terms of those hard questions. Number 3, complete media training for your senior teams and your junior teams. Remember, the person answering the phone in your company, they're your first line of defense. And number 4, have some sort of an arrangement with an outside company who can support you, because when the weight of the world's media falls in your lap, no company has the capacity to deal with that on an ongoing basis. Have a plan in place to use outside support. Because at the end of the day, people will almost always assume the worst. This was an incident from a few years ago in the UK where a vessel tipped a load of timber into the sea. Environmental impacts, minor. People had a new deck the next year, miraculously. But that didn't stop someone a little way up the coast doing this. Spelling out with the wood, imagine if this was oil. Unless we tell people not to be afraid, they will be afraid. Unless we win their trust, why should they trust us? Unless we explain the difference between what is believable and what is true, why would we expect them to get it right? Thank you very much.